All right. Hey, welcome everyone. I'm glad you're able to join us this week to discuss some of the economic and jobs data with our director, Michael Ettlinger. My name's Dan Bromberg. I'm going to throw a few questions his way, and we'll have a bit of a conversation around some of the new data that came out. So, Michael, I'm going to turn to you quickly. So you've been doing this for a couple months now, right? Looking at this data, and obviously, this is data that you've looked at, over the years and kind of looked at these trends throughout the last recession and now moving into this. Could you talk to us a bit about why you think this is important for our audience to see at Carsey School? This is important for kind of the broader public to see and understand what's going on.
Yeah, so we're focusing in on the state level data on what's happening with particularly jobs in the economy. And the reason we're doing that is that the big headline national numbers get a lot of attention already. And, kind of every economist in the country weighs in when the Bureau of Labor Statistics comes out with those numbers. But these state by state numbers are get less attention. They come out a little later and people don't focus in on them, but they're really important because people say, oh, there's a recession going on and where the economy's doing badly. But the reality is different states are in different, have somewhat separated economies and different things are happening. And it's important to understand that both in terms of just recognizing that the lived experience of people is different in different places, but also in crafting a response in thinking about what areas need to do differently and what's causing the effects.
Yeah, it's super interesting. It's when you guys are kind of cutting up the data so we could see that. In particular, focusing in on Michigan for a second. So obviously the manufacturing, jobs in Michigan were hit pretty hard. I'm curious if we're going to see, or what you think, if you think we might see some fluctuation with the unemployment numbers there, as a factory closes and then a factory opens again. Is this going to be kind of consistent, or are we going to see constant fluctuation from month to month and week to week?
Well, a couple of things to remember about Michigan in particular. One is that just like every other state, Michigan, the hardest hit sector was leisure and hospitality, restaurants, hotels, and that, just like every other state. And although Michigan does rely more heavily on manufacturing than other states, most other states, it's not overwhelming. And it's not like this image we might have in our head of a state just filled with auto plants. That's not really what Michigan is at this point. And it's a little uncertain, but Michigan's manufacturing sector got hit harder than other states' manufacturing. So that was definitely a factor. But the other big thing that's important to remember is it's also one of the hardest hit states by COVID-19. They were, I think, 8th in the number of cases per capita at the time these data came out. But to get to your question about whether things are going to fluctuate or not, I mean, sure, I expect there's a lot of speculation going on what the recovery from this is going to look like. A lot of it tracks what the health recovery looks like, of course. But my view is it's sort of going to get to bottom and sort of hover there for a little while, just because, things won't, businesses that could stay open will have stayed open. The ones where there's a health problem will start coming back slowly at first and then more quickly is what I anticipate. I don't actually think we're going to see a period where manufacturing facilities, some are closing and some are opening. I think we'll get to a point where the ones that needed to be closed are closed or were deemed non-essential, and then they'll just gradually start coming back.
Yeah, I guess I was kind of just thinking about, in the news cycle over the past week or so, you've been hearing, well, this plant opened and then they had to cease operations relatively quickly because there was a bit of an outbreak.
No, it's a good point. It's a good point. And I would just say that, but I think that's going to be relatively, in terms of the overall tens of millions of jobs that are being lost, I think that's just going to be a little bopping around at the bottom, sort of.
Okay.
Unless there's talk just from the health side, there's a talk of a big second wave. If a big second wave of the illness occurs, that of course could, plunge things pretty quickly. Because one of the things that stood out in these data is that of the 10 states that lost the most jobs, 7 of them were in the top 10 in COVID cases per capita. So, clearly what's driving the job loss is the disease, more so than actually the stay-at-home orders. I mean, they're related, of course, but when a state wins stay-at-home is much less of a predictor than just the number of cases seen.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and even in the states that didn't have the high number of COVID testing. So Vermont, for example, right? I mean, with accommodations and leisure, they're still dependent on a lot of those other states to bring people in, right? So
right. Well, the other 3 states, other than this, in the top 10 of job loss, the 3 states that weren't particularly high COVID states were all states that relied heavily on leisure and hospitality. So it's Hawaii, Vermont, and Nevada, right? So states that rely on tourism, more heavily than most, and so that's what was driving it in those states. Those are the 2 things that explain the most where you are on the list of job loss.
Yeah, it was quite interesting to see that. The other really kind of striking table or chart that I saw that you guys put out there was the relationship between wage and loss of job. And really in that lower left-hand quadrant, the only thing in there was accommodations and leisure, and everything else. Well, a good portion of those jobs, were in that upper right-hand quadrant, not being affected at all. So I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit. And then any guesses? I mean, will we see any drift from those higher wage jobs that might start getting affected a bit more?
So just to explain, the lower left-hand quadrant of the graph is lots of job loss in an industry, low wage. The upper right that Dan was referring to is fewer job loss, higher wage. And what you see is an overall pattern of lower wage jobs. Industries with lower average weekly wages saw a lot more job loss than industries with high weekly wages. And you really see accommodations and food services is about as low wage industry as there is as a whole, and it is by far the most job loss. But you also see, other industries that didn't have quite as catastrophic job loss also, there's just an overall pattern of lower wage industries seeing more job loss. And I think there will be sort of there's a lag in these data, and I suspect in the next round, we'll see more job loss from a broader section of industries, because clearly restaurants, hotels, those things were at the lead of what happened. But I think you're going to still see the same pattern, because people in the information sector, right, newspapers, radio, whatever, they can keep working from home, right? Or finance, people in finance can keep working from home. It's just they're much less dependent on the face-to-face contact, and also they have more secure employment situations. There's a reason people in those industries are paid more, and one is that they have more market power in the labor market. So employers are going to be, they are, just in a financial sense, they are more valuable to the employer, and they're going to want to keep them on, just so when we come out the other side of this, they have them, they still have those workers, and they're not looking around and going to other firms. Whereas, in the restaurant industry, I mean, it takes skill to be a waiter or waitress, but there's a lot more turnover in that industry. So if you let people go, there's more confidence that you can bring them back. And that tends to generally be true in lower wage industries. And, there's a reason they're lower wage. So.
Yeah. One of the other sectors that surprised me, and I don't think it was necessarily that the loss was so high, but government employees were experiencing a a decent loss as well. And that was kind of striking to me. I was surprised.
Yeah, it's troubling because what you want in any recession, which whether this technically ends up being a recession or not, in any big economic downturn, is government is really where employment can continue to come from, right? And it comes either directly, as you were referring to, workers working for government, but also all the stimulus efforts to keep people whole and to keep the economy moving. And I think it isn't just about whether people are working in government. It's about the spill-on effects, right? All these restaurants that are relying on people coming and getting takeout, stuff that people are ordering online, all of the things that are keeping going the economy going. Well, it's just and people who are unemployed are spending less, and that has a spiral effect to bring down the economy, right? So there's the first order things are shut down, and then there's people having less money in their pocket because they're unemployed, which causes more things to shut down because they're not spending it into the part of the economy that would otherwise be okay. And if government is piling on, the private sector's getting hit and sort of doesn't have as much of a choice. But if government is piling on, when government has more capacity, because at least at the federal level it can borrow, and states and localities can string things out a little longer, that's another anchor on the economy overall that you really don't want to see. A lot of this, there's a big debate in Washington about how much the federal government should help out state and local governments so they don't have to do this. And the reason they turn to the federal government is that most states and municipalities, almost all of them, have a balanced budget requirement. There's a real limit on how much they can borrow. Often it requires a vote of the public, which in this time frame isn't practical. So that's why you have the federal government step in and backstop state and local governments at a time like this. And it hasn't done that in a big way yet. And it would be a shame if government became part of the problem instead of part of the solution as we tried to dig our way out of this. Because this isn't going to just end, right? It takes a while for things to get going again.
Yeah, I'll flip to this quickly. I have a couple more questions just based on time. We won't do this all day. So just, in thinking about, states and state revenue, and obviously this is cutting across the board as far as state revenue goes. Anything that you could kind of think of or anything that you've seen out there where states are able to manage this crisis a little bit better? They've either had a system in place for revenue that works, or rainy day funds, or anything along those lines.
Even states that had strong rainy day funds, they've just ripped through just because it's so bad. When you have 20 million people more, when you have millions and millions of people going unemployed, payroll tax, withholding taxes coming in, retail sales are just, so there's no sales tax. They're just, and they've had extraordinary expenditures they have had to make. They're just tearing through the rainy day funds. So there were states that were in stronger and weaker positions, but even the ones that were really solid shape are getting into trouble now. So it's just going to be a tough situation for states and municipalities. They're damned if they do, damned if they don't, right? Within the, they're not supposed to, where does the money come from, right? But on the other hand, they have essential expenditures they need to take care of to deal with the crisis. And then they also have, and also they just don't want to cut because of the effects that it has.
So my last question, which is going to be a question that, you probably don't love, because I'm asking you to think about, what's this going to look like 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 2 years from now. So here's the question.
Everything's going to be fun.
Before I get there, that one graph that you guys have of just the job losses and how just drastic it is to see how straight down it is. when thinking about a recovery, and you guys make mention this recovery might look different than the recovery out of the recession. It probably will look different.
Yeah, sure.
We'll get to this point where certain industries either bottom out or stabilize or figure out what that new normal is. Are there any industries that you see as like needing to be leaders in this, in getting us out of this? I mean, do we need to get the accommodations and leisure back together for the economy to grow? What will that look like? Any thoughts around that?
The thing about it is that people have a tendency to focus on specific industries, but the fact is that they're all interconnected, right? Because a lot of what in economist term, a lot of what drives it is demand, meaning basically, which in the end is consumers or government buying things. And so, I think there are some choices to be made. So, for instance, we've been hearing for a while that we need to make a big investment in infrastructure in this country, right? So if the government actually decided to finally do that and make the big infrastructure investment that we need for other reasons, as an effort to get us going again, well, then the construction industry would kind of lead. And again, the mechanics of that means more construction workers are getting paid, and they spend money, which helps bring up the retail, and it kind of cascades in a good way from that. But other than that, it's just I think all boats sort of need to rise together. I do think that particularly hotel and restaurants, just because of social distancing requirements, are likely to be a drag for a while. It just seems hard for me to believe. And, to some extent, people may spend their money on other things. So like you might see retail doing a little better and some manufacturing, but, that part of the economy is going to take longer to come back, I expect.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. Well, thank you. I appreciate the conversation. Busy day. We're all busy, and thanks for taking 15 minutes to chat with us, chat with our audience, and hopefully we can do this again in the next couple of weeks or so.
All right. Good talking with you.